What I'm going to talk about is, in essence, how we see the problem in Germany in terms of the lack of openness and transparency on the use of animals in research. For those of you who don't know, EARA is a relatively new not-for-profit association set up in 2014. We have around 80 members, as we were said, including the MDC. Max Planck Society in Germany. I've listed the institutions in Germany who are members. I mean, interestingly enough, we bring together private and public research into one organisation, which historically has been a bit of a problem in Germany in attempts to unite public and private research. And quite often academics don't want to work with industry, and industry doesn't trust academia, which is a problem in many countries, but it's a particular problem in Germany. And for whatever reason, EARA has been quite successful in bringing these organisations together. So we have a significant body of institutions in Germany who see the need, like we do, to improve openness and transparency. So what are from my point of view, what do we think are the challenges that we face as a scientific community in trying to win a public argument or trying to gain broader public support for the use of animals in research? In essence, my point today is that those challenges have really changed. And for any of you who've been involved in animal research for more than 8 or 9 years will have seen significant changes. Traditionally, an event like this, you'd have seen people outside protesting. You'd often see people using extremist language and often being quite violent in the past against animal research. I can say today that in Germany, as in every other European country, there is not a single researcher or a single institution, either private research or public research, who's the subject of a nasty, vicious campaign as in the past. Part of my job, I meet the police, and they very readily make this point today that it's gone. But that's not to say there aren't groups who are opposed, ethically opposed, morally opposed to these animals in research. But the whole situation has changed. And we no longer face the threats in the past. So what are the challenges? I think the first challenges we face is a communications challenge. These organisations no longer wear balaclavas and what have you. They are professional lobbyists and professional communicators. Obviously, their messages that animal research is torture and the benefits of animal research for humans are illusory, don't exist, are quite simple and quite straightforward. And often the scientific messaging is a bit more mediated than that. Our messages around the use of animals in research for basic research or applied research are not often reducible to kind of like little sound bites. But they are much better than we are. They are often much better communicators than we are. They're professionally run organisations with lots of money, and they are very good at what they do. We also face what we call legislative challenges, attempts to amend the law, to regulate the law. Obviously in Germany you have the complication of there being federal laws that also impact on animal research. But across the whole of Europe, this was the last significant attempt to make it more difficult to use animals in research. This was the European Citizens Initiative, the ECI, which was brought in on the back of getting 1.5 million signatures. And its demand to the European Commission was effectively to end all animal research. The Commission threw it out. It believed that there were valid scientific, ethical reasons for the use of animals in research. But interestingly enough, it actually agreed with part of the petition's aims, actually, claims, actually, which was that animal research is too secretive. There's not enough transparency when it comes to animal research in Europe. And the Commission encouraged greater engagement by the scientific community to the public. And another Commission often says things that people don't listen to, and we can have a good discussion about the Commission, but I think when it comes to this, it's worth thinking about that, because today transparency and openness is the zeitgeist. And if there's a perception that the public are being denied information which they somehow believe belongs to them, and the scientific community doesn't listen to that, then we should not be surprised if at some point compulsion comes in, or at some point the research community is forced to be more open. And I think that would be a bad move for us all. We also face what I would call reputational challenges. You know, the shift away from violence has led to more ingenious means of challenging animal research. And as you know, with the Max Planck Society in Germany a couple of years ago, the undercover film led to and continues to lead to significant challenges for researchers and the Max Planck as an institution. And although undercover films are quite rare events, they can have a devastating impact on institutions because you realise the person you were working with in the lab was somebody who was there for other purposes. And although these are rare events, as I said, they can have a big impact. And we also face, interestingly enough, scientific challenges. Activists are now seeking to have scientific articles in scientifically approved journals challenging some of the basic essences of animal research, and they attend the same conferences that we attend. In one sense, we should welcome this because obviously it means that it's a scientific discussion, and that's to be welcomed. But it's interesting that they think they can win the argument within the scientific community. So what are the opportunities? Those are the challenges. What opportunities do we have as scientists or as a community to improve openness in animal research? So, as I said, in November 2017, the European Commission published its review of the overarching legislation that governs animal research in Europe, the EU directive. And it made the point that the directive had improved openness and transparency, that there had been significant changes in the way the scientific community seeks to explain, justify why they use animals in research. But it also believed that we could go much further. And actually, EARA agrees with them. So what I want to do is just, to back that up, give you a kind of interim results of a survey that EARA is currently carrying out. We're looking at trying to identify every institution in Europe that uses animals in research, and to assess how open and transparent they are. And obviously this is a kind of mammoth project. And the guy at the back, Graham, who's only actually 18 years old, he's obviously aged by doing this, he's leading this project for us. So what we're trying to look at is try to review the websites of institutions. And the European Commission supports this idea. By hook or by crook, we managed to convince the Commission to circulate to every national authority in Europe, so every government, that regulates animal research in their country. They've distributed a survey to every institution. So I think currently it's about 110 for Germany. We have around 1,300 institutions now who have given us information about their websites. This is not about naming and shaming, exposing an institution that's really bad at communicating. That would be a terrible thing to do. That wouldn't help anybody. It's about developing best practice and allowing EARA to give this information back to our members and the wider scientific community. What I thought I'd do today is just give you a couple of slides to give you a feeling from this survey as to how open and transparent institutions are in Germany. So one of the questions we look at is, does the institution that has animals in research have any kind of statement on its website? Any kind of visible admission that it carries out animal research within its institution? So this is based on 109 German institutions. There's more to come, but a significant number. So no. So nearly 60% of German institutions, and remember these are really going to be public institutions in the main, that take taxpayers' money, hide the research they do. They deny or don't even want to talk about it. So it's, they're hiding the research that they carry out. Do the websites carry any extensive information on the website about work that's undertaken there, some kind of background stories, specific information about some of the research projects? Maybe an attempt to deal with some of the myths that fly around about animal research? No. So 77% have nothing, have no information. So you can go to a university website, for example, and you can find out somewhere on that website that maybe mice are being used, or one of the researchers at that institution has mice, or uses mice. But there's no context given for it at all. There's no explanation for it. Third question is images. We've all seen those pictures that those opposed to animal research use, old pictures of rabbits smoking cigarettes or whatever it is. Pretty old images, which you walk down the street and you see them on a Saturday morning on some kind of table. They look pretty shocking. And obviously, as we know these days, imagery is very important. And the activists have a lot of images, often old, often out of context. So how do we measure up? How many institutions have any kind of pictures of their own research or any kind of video that might try to explain or put in context why they use animals in research? So, much the same. So nearly 80% of all German institutions that use animals in research have no imagery at all. I mean, why do we let the activists be the moral authority on these issues? Why do we allow them to have all the imagery? Oh, sorry, and it's even worse. So of the 23% that do, a quarter are bought off the internet, from a photographic agency. So it's not even images of their own research. It's imagery from some lab in Singapore or somewhere else. Final question is what we call prominence. So once you get to the university website, say University of Vienna, how many clicks does it take you to get from the front page of the beautiful picture of Vienna and the university to the pages on their websites that explain what they do? So we call it prominence. We were quite generous, we said 3 clicks. Does it take more than 3 clicks to get to the biomedical pages, or does it take less than 3 clicks? Unsurprisingly, it takes more than 3 clicks. So even those institutions that have something, it's pretty difficult to find it. It's pretty difficult to find it. And what impact has it had on public opinion? I mean, this is the last opinion poll I've seen in Germany. On most issues, you can see the German public is sceptical on a number of issues, and often their views of animal research are more negative compared to the rest of Europe. And if you put that into context outside of Europe, say in America, we face a real crisis in public opinion. So the last 2 opinion polls in the US would tell you that if you ask people the cold question, there is a cold question, do you support the use of animals in biomedical research? Less than 50% of the American population say yes. And that's a real crisis compared to, say, the 1970s and 1980s. And you could say, well, that doesn't really matter because research will take place. But then look at this slide. So this is a slide looking at an amalgam of all the opinion polls in the US, looking at people, is it morally acceptable or morally unacceptable to use animals in research? And as you can see, those 2 lines are coming together. And the prediction is 2023, when those who think it's morally right or morally wrong to use animal research will come together. And if you look at other issues in the US, this is interesting because if you look at something like, say, same-sex marriage or civil partnerships, those who thought it was a terrible thing, and those who think it's perfectly fine for people of the same sex to marry or live together, when that became much the same, that's when often legislation changed, for the benefit. So this is the issue. I mean, I don't think it's as black and white as if those 2 things come together, that animal research will be banned in the US. I'm not saying that, but it's indicative of a problem. So EARA thinks that there's a real need and opportunity now to try to seek to improve public understanding and acceptability of animals in research. And I just want to give you a few examples of things we think we can do. So this is the first one, which is the publication of animal use statistics. This is something which is a legal requirement. It's part of the European directive. But most countries just do nothing about it. So on a Monday morning on the government's website, all this information is just dumped, which says last year animal use went up by 30%. We used this amount of primates, this amount of zebrafish, this amount of rabbits. And often scientific communicators go on holiday and nothing. You know, if you're an activist, it's like your birthday and Christmas have come together because you have all this information presented to you and you can write what you want. There's no scientific explanation. There's no context given for the numbers. And it's really an important messaging opportunity for the scientific community, which has been completely lost. You know, if the scientific community can talk about this, you can explain the fluctuations, why numbers go up and down, put the research into context. It provides a much better platform for the public to understand. So EARA has offered to work with the Commission to offer them a template for how we can improve the publication of animal use statistics as a way of kind of engaging the public. Another area which you probably all know is non-technical summaries. So these are things which are part of the European directive. They are the summary of your research you need to present if you're going to get the go-ahead for research. It lists the harm benefits, the numbers you're going to use, the application of the 3 R's. We think there's an opportunity to actually make this a much more friendly document for the public. So EARA has created a working group involving not just the scientific community, but also the welfare organisation in the UK, the RSPCA, as a means of trying to improve the language in these summaries. And in a number of countries now and a number of institutions, these project summaries are on university websites, and so you can see the information available. The final area is what Bob alluded to at the beginning, which is EARA and our partners have put together in a number of countries what we call national transparency agreements. So these are agreements by which those who have signed up to it agree to a set of principles by which they will seek to be more open and transparent with the public. Began in the UK through Understanding Animal Research in 2014, in Spain and in Portugal. And we're hoping this year to do the similar in Belgium, Austria and Italy. So in the UK, these are the institutions involved. It's Cambridge University, Oxford University, pharmaceutical companies, animal breeders, medical research charities and patient groups who fund animal research have also agreed to be more open about the research they do. In Spain, it's now, I think, around 120, mainly all public research. There's not much private research in Spain. These are all universities. And obviously, you know, some of these universities are very big, very small. Some have primates, some just have zebrafish. It's all about being open about the research that you do and finding steps to engage with the public. The commitments are the institutions will be open about the research they carry out. If they media, like the NDC does, if they media release something and an animal's been involved, just mention the animal. Put that animal in context. I mean, the headline is never guinea pig saves the world, but if a guinea pig has been used in the research, just mention the animal. It's a way of normalising with the public why we use animals in research. And the other commitments are about engaging with the media in a proactive way. As Bob said, we're doing this one of 3 events in Germany. I'd like to run a Concordat in Germany if possible, but this is hopefully the start. But finally, even in the US, so myself and some colleagues had a letter published in an American newspaper 2 weeks ago. Over 700 researchers in the US, including some Nobel Prize winners, have made a statement in the US that they also need to engage on this issue. So I do think this is an important cultural moment. It's a moment we need to grasp, and I do hope that we can encourage greater openness and transparency in Germany. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. We can take questions very specifically about.
Would you give us a hint how to start with this openness? Because sometimes I think the public is not prepared for the information that is shocked, and how we can take the public with us to understand what's behind the data.
Firstly, openness actually starts inside the institution itself. So there's a necessity to make sure that people in your institution know what you do. And often you find in institutions, you know, people in many other departments have no idea there's a research facility, because often there's no label or any kind of badge that says it's what we do. That's the first thing. But I think the thing I would do is to say, okay, bring together 3 or 4 people who are the key decision makers within your institution. So it would be the head of science, the dean of science, maybe the communications person, maybe one of the researchers, the person who runs the animal facility, and have an honest assessment and say, okay, this is where we are today. This is what we do, this is what we don't do. Where we would like to be in 1 year's time. And what are the small steps we would need to take? And it may be the first thing you do is, as I mentioned, next time an animal has been used in some research which is published, just mention the animal. You probably find that nobody even notices it. It might be, okay, that we've done that, how about now putting on a statement on our website about the animals we use and the purpose for it. I would do that. So you do it step by step, and by doing it like that, you make sure you bring the institution with you. In terms of the public, just about every opinion poll that you look at on this issue, I know opinion polls are not trusted anymore. You know, they got Trump wrong, they got Brexit wrong, but I do think opinion polls can give us some kind of indication where people stand on this issue. And every opinion poll I've ever looked at, if you ask the question, do you support the use of animals in research, like that, a cold question, support is quite low. It's shockingly low. But once you provide a bit of context, so do you support the use of animals in research for cancer research, looking at Zika, Ebola, looking at Parkinson's disease, dementia, what have you, support goes up, up and up. It's all about context. So if we can provide context, that works. And this is going to sound really crazy to a lot of people, but I think we need to trust the public. I mean, 10 years ago, if you said that you can trust the public, then people would say, of course. But these days, politicians, a lot of us, don't trust the public. They think the public is excitable, the public can do terrible things, and yes, they probably can. But I think if you provide the public with the emotional and factual information, I think we should trust the public to make up their minds. And I think if they make up their minds in the context of information, they'll go with science and progress.
Regarding the context, giving people such a context, I mean, we had this meeting this year with this organization which was called Medical Doctors Against Animal Research.
Yes.
We gave them the context. We actually tried to argue, and what they said is that cancer and all other diseases are human-made. What do you argue with these people? I mean, like, in the end, they broke up the discussion and they just were gone. How can you argue as a scientist?
Well, I wouldn't argue with them. See, I argue with these people all the time. But I think our arguments, our messages are not for them, they're for the public. Because, I think, one-to-one debating them is fine. We're not trying to convince them that they're wrong. In every society you're going to find people who are ethically, morally convinced that animal research is the last possible thing they want. You're not going to convince them. In that society you're going to find substantial numbers of people who are in favour of animal research. But in the middle, you find a public which is denied the information. Because in most countries, what you see is, in this ear, they hear that animal research is torture, that the diseases are human-made, that animal research doesn't translate into human benefit. In this ear, they hear nothing. They hear very little. So our argument isn't that animal research is the answer to everything, but we need to provide a balanced story for the public, a balanced narrative. And if people only hear one side of an argument, they're going to go with the argument. So debate these people. I debate them. It's a bit of fun. But they're not our audience. Our audience is the public. It's their lovers, it's their mothers, it's their brothers, it's their sisters. That's our audience, not them.